here's a contract and this is what it does, and give me your money. Like, how do you know the code I'm showing you is exactly doing what I'm saying to you?
Okay, we are live. So, hi everyone. Today we have another podcast together with Austin, where we have Kaan Uzdogan from the Ethereum Foundation, from the Sourcify team with us today. And actually, Kaan was one of the first people I met in the Ethereum ecosystem, I think almost 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today. Could you start by like a short intro about yourself, and then we can get more into Sourcify and the details?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone. Hi Ada. Hi Austin. Um, so as you may know, my name is Kaan, and I am currently working at the Sourcify project at the Ethereum Foundation, as you may introduced. Um, yeah, I'm originally from Turkey. I am based in Berlin. I have been working on the project since almost, I guess, 2 years. Yeah, this September it's going to be 2 years. Yeah, but I've always been involved in blockchains and in the ecosystem. But yeah, that's shortly what I am doing.
You're not at the Berlin office, the EF office, right? There is one there,
Um,
isn't there?
yeah, it's you've been there, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
we
It's got
worked
the
together a couple.
door with all the stickers on it, and it's like on the
Exactly.
fourth floor. Yeah.
Yeah, the famous store and the office. Yeah, and right now I'm not in the office. I'm at my home, but I go to the office quite often. I'm one of the regulars, I would say, at least twice or three times a week I try to go. Yeah, we have a beautiful office with a terrace. It's much larger now. When I joined, it was smaller, but we just basically moved up to the top floor. Um, but yeah, but I haven't seen still the very first office, like where everything started. It's really close, but yeah, but this place
But
is really
speaking
quite
of the
nice.
EF, the EF works in an interesting way, right? Where it's kind of subtractive in nature, and it's about applying pressure only when needed and not creating chilling effects. And it's really interesting
Exactly.
when we see a product come out that's similar to another product, and that's kind of like what we're talking about today. We have Etherscan and contract verification over there, but there's a glaring issue about its open sourceness, right? And
Yeah.
so, could you maybe explore the trade-offs there and the subtleties of creating a product within the EF that is
Hmm.
similar to another product, but it's actually trying to nurture more of an open source vibe?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's one of the things EF pays attention to, like the chilling effect you mentioned, for example. The EF generally does not try to bring out official apps. I mean, in the early days, of course, there were more need for a central organization to come up with everything, as we can see in Solidity, in Geth. Those all like fundamental projects, really important projects started at the EF. But today's ecosystem looks much different than 5 years ago, because right now we have so many stakeholders, so many developers have joined, and EF rather stays minimal, tries to stay minimal and delegate these efforts to um, members of the ecosystem, and help them in other ways, in financially, in um, for example, the coordination efforts of the consensus calls or execution calls are still done by the EF. So it generally steps a bit back and let the ecosystem nurture. In the case of Sourcify, this was different, because generally, because of the history of the project, let's say, I would say today it's a bit more difficult to start a project inside an EF than a couple of years ago. Sourcify started around 3.5 years ago inside the Solidity team. So it was generally it was an idea of Chris Reitlisna, the previous lead of Solidity. He mainly, so the idea is also based on some Solidity features, and also he and some other people came up with the MVP, and then the project was delegated to outsourced to another company in Croatia called Shard Labs. So they kind of made a complete product, and then 2 years ago they decided to bring it back to the EF in-house, and then that's when I joined and took over the project, and yeah, since then I'm leading it.
So I do want to get into the project, but that's a really good point. Like the EF is very minimal and like tries to do like little intervention, and then people have a lot of ownership, which I think we will get to. But before we even get into Sourcify, what is like even smart contract verification?
Yeah, great question. I always try to pose this question to other people when I'm explaining as well. The main reason we have source code verification, the concept, is because we as humans cannot read the bytecode, right? When you deploy a contract on chain in Ethereum, in EVM, and also in many other blockchains, when you deploy a contract, it lives there as a bytecode. So it lives in ones and zeros or hexadecimal strings, if you see that, and we can't read and make sense of that, right? So what we can read generally, if you are a bit code literate, you can read code, is languages like Solidity, Viper, the smart contract languages. But if I come to you and say, okay, like here's a contract and this is what it does, and give me your money, like how do you know the code I'm showing you is exactly doing what I'm saying to you? So someone somehow has to verify that the code you're seeing is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Yeah. In that case, you as the contract deployer, typically a contract author, or actually anyone, can come to us, give us a contract source code in Solidity, in Viper. We compile it, and then we compare it against the bytecode on chain. And this whole thing, of course now it's a bit simplified, but this whole thing is the source code verification process.
I see. Awesome. And so Sourcify is like a source code verification platform or tool, like for Solidity smart contracts. Do I have that right?
Yeah, we only have Solidity support right now. Yeah.
And the back end of this thing, just trying to imagine the tech, you probably have some servers in the cloud that have SolC on them. And then you know the bytecode by looking it up online, but you also probably have to keep some database of smart contracts once they match up. But basically someone submits some Solidity code and you compile it down to bytecode, and then you compare that bytecode to the on-chain version. And if it's exactly the same, then you create some link between the saved Solidity that you have and the bytecode that it compiled to. And then so if anybody comes back and says, hey, like I've got this bytecode, and then you have a database basically that links back to one that you proved it compiled to. Is my mental model there pretty good?
It is going to be soon, because the project has some legacy code, let's say, and it was a file system based project. So whenever you verify something, it's saved on a file system, and that means we don't have bytecodes or any other metadata stored anywhere. So long time this has been holding us back, but right now we are switching over a database solution. Another reason was the project is generally based on a Solidity feature called smart contract metadata, which is, I can explain it a bit further in the detail, but in general this uses IPFS. So we had to store these files on IPFS and serve them over IPFS, and this was the, I guess, main motivation to have this as a file system based project. But yeah, we're switching over and trying to enrich the data in other ways.
And technically, this is like chain agnostic as long as it's SolC compiling. So any EVM compatible chain probably works. But for that to work, you have to have your system wired up to that chain to go look for that bytecode, right? So are you chain agnostic? Are there chains that you support? What's the details there, the subtleties?
Yeah, we mainly rely on RPC calls. There's also a interesting subtlety that I like talking about, which is so there are two types of bytecode. There is the runtime bytecode and there's the creation bytecode. Creation bytecode is the bytecode that the compiler gives you, then you give it to the EVM, then the EVM executes it, and then runtime bytecode is saved at the contract address. So runtime one is when you execute something, it's runtime. When you create it, it's the creation bytecode. The RPCs, unfortunately, give us only the runtime bytecode. So we currently in Sourcify, we only verify through the runtime bytecode. And this is actually centralizing force inside the source code verification. So we have right now, I have the numbers in front of me. We have like 152 chains that we have verification support, 30 deprecated ones. So like we can't basically run an indexer and keep track of all these 150 chains ourselves. And that's why we have to rely on the existing RPCs for giving us runtime bytecode. And so the creation bytecode we can try to find from the transactions. Like if a contract is created with a AOA, external account, then we can go to that transaction that created that contract and find the payload there. But if it's a factory, for example, the creation bytecode is only retrievable from the message calls. And for that, you need to trace the transaction. For that, you need an archive node, or someone needs to index everything. And that's a big reason we are not, like, to keep the infra small, to be able to support more chains, we keep it small and just, based on to do it on the runtime bytecode.
This is a really interesting subtlety, and now I think I get it. But just to say it again, there's kind of deployed bytecode and runtime bytecode, and
creation
bytecode and runtime bytecode. And really what you want is the creation bytecode. Yeah. But to do that, you have to run an archive node. And you said 150 chains, you have to run 150 different archive nodes, which would be hella infrastructure. So you've chosen to go with the runtime side, where you can just use any RPC. And if all you have to do is query the RPC, then you just, like, adding a new chain is as easy as adding the RPC for the chain, and then you can support it. Okay, very cool.
It's as simple as just opening a template PR and getting it merged. And the reason generally we went this way, so there was a discussion in the early days, like, do we want to support everyone, or do we constrain ourselves to Ethereum and, let's say, surrounding ecosystem only, and rollups and L2s and so on? Then we decided to welcome everyone. For the main reason being, like, these chains also need a source code verification service. Like, either BlockScout also provides one, but if they don't have BlockScout and so on, they need an external service, and not all of them can run an Etherscan, which is quite expensive. And also to onboard these people working on these chains, like the long tail. And I think that also helped project to be known well over the time.
So I want to ask actually one of the questions we touched upon when we started, like about Etherscan and the difference, because most people, like, today, I think, like, default to Etherscan for a lot of stuff. So, like, how is Sourcify different from Etherscan? And I actually also don't think, like, it's very well known that Etherscan is like a small closed source, but maybe you can touch upon it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, one thing, as you said, is not a lot of people are aware that Etherscan is a closed source company, a profitable company that's running a closed source software. A lot of people think or assume it's an open source non-profit thing, which does not mean that's a bad thing. Like, I believe I talk about Etherscan a lot because they are the main player, and I really don't want to point fingers when I talk there, so I always try to explain this ahead. Like, they provide a lot of value to the ecosystem, I would say, and the people there are also great. Like, I'm also quite close to them. I talk about these stuff with them as well, but the company itself is not incentivized to open source it, and they have a huge network effect. Like everyone basically, whenever using a chain, they want an Etherscan. Like they don't want any other explorers. And as you say, it's closed source. And the more important thing, like the other important thing, let's say, is the data is closed. So it's not possible to get the whole smart contract data of a chain or any other chain in bulk and do some data analysis or like any other stuff, because you have to basically scrape the Etherscan, and it's technically, like legally, you can't do that. So if you look at the terms and conditions, you can't use bots to retrieve data and so on. So I believe this does not align with the ethos of Ethereum. So I think like this data should be quite easy to access and really open, and generally like the software should be open source so that everyone can run it.
Yeah, Etherscan is a business, and they have to defend their business. And I think one of the biggest pieces of business for them, and I have no idea, but it's when one of these new chains comes online, it's straight up just like $1 million if you want an Etherscan for your chain.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
some of these chains can afford that, and they have to defend that to charge $1 million to launch a website and an indexer is ballsy. So okay, so what I want to lean into now is, you mentioned BlockScout, and BlockScout is an open source explorer, and we do see, when base launches or OP launches, $1 million is easy for them. They go to Etherscan. But when you said 150 chains, there's a lot of them down the long tail that probably go to BlockScout to do their Block Explorer because it's open source. So we have closed source but highly lendy Etherscan, and then we have Sourcify doing source code verification open source, but then there's also BlockScout. Can you talk about how BlockScout plays into this picture?
Yeah, BlockScout, we're quite good friends with BlockScout, I have to say. As you said, so if we make the distinction here, BlockScout and Etherscan are block explorers. So they are like a larger infra that keep track of everything that's going on a blockchain, and you can run them yourself, for example, for BlockScout, or they also have the option to provide the service, Explorer as a service. That's how they make money. So they are both open source, and they provide the service for you if you want. So they can do it at the same time, whereas in Etherscan it's just, they can run it and you can't. And we are just a source code verification service. So we only focus on the source code verification side, and we don't keep track of everything that's going on blockchain. BlockScout, I would say, is generally the explorer these long tail of chains are using. They actually don't know how many BlockScouts are there because it's just open source, and some of them I think they keep track, and it's a couple hundreds. If I remember correctly, it's like 300-400 instances, and maybe like 50 of them they are running, but otherwise like there's a wild west of chains over there that run a BlockScout, and they have Sourcify and so on. So it's interesting.
But BlockScout does contract verification, right?
Exactly. They do contract verification, but they also support Sourcify. So like in BlockScout, you can either do it through BlockScout, or there's an option to send your contract to Sourcify, and they fetch it from Sourcify. The main reason is because I forgot to mention this when talking about differences with Etherscan, is we also do a different type of verification for Solidity contracts. This is a bit technical, but in short, the Solidity compiler by default adds a hash at the end of the contract, like at the end of the bytecode. We actually have a tool for this in our playground.sourcify.dev. So there you can like play around with some example contracts and see the bytecode and decode it. This bytecode contains a file hash in IPFS hash. And this file is the Solidity contract metadata. It's the metadata JSON file. This file contains two things. One, how do I interact with this contract, like the ABI, the documentation. Two, how can I reproduce this compilation? So you have the compilation settings, the compiler version, the language, and the sources. So these sources can be embedded, so you can have the full text source inside the JSON, or you can have a IPFS hash of that source. So, and that means like whenever you make a small change on the source file, or like compilation settings or anything, like even a white space in the source code will traverse up into a different hash at the end of the bytecode. That means if you give us a contract, we compile it, then we compare it, and okay, we first see the first part without the hash, it's matching, good. We know these contracts behave the same, like they are functionally the same. But things like variable names, comments, these are not, this information is lost inside the bytecode, so you can't find this in the bytecode. But if you verify with both this part plus the hash at the end of the bytecode, you are like 100% sure what you are seeing is exactly what the contract author has deployed at the time.
So there's an extra fingerprint that comes along with the verification.
Exactly.
That's like the stuff that's not included in the bytecode is still like a fingerprint of comments and every little thing there. If they put ASCII art at the top, that's going to affect that fingerprint that you're adding along with this verification. Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And with that also you can fetch this from IPFS, because if this is fully verified, we serve those files for you, or you can publish yourself as well. Then these files are retrievable from IPFS, and then you don't even need us to get the files. You still need to verify. That's an important point. So like you can't be sure the file you're getting still is the same, is matching the bytecode, because someone manually can put the hash there. You still need to verify, but you wouldn't need us to get the files. That was the main one of the main features of the solidity metadata and this metadata hash thing. It's a feature and it's a bug. Some people don't like it. Some people, for good reasons, some of them, especially if the compilation is sometimes really sensitive. Like if you change, as you can imagine, if you change a small thing, the whole hash changes. Sometimes this causes trouble in different platforms. Like if you have different file systems, for example, like even sometimes I guess at the time it used to be the slashes that are, for example, changing and so on. I guess these are mostly overcome, but still some people don't prefer using it, especially, for example, if you want to deploy a contract at the same address on every chain with a create2, then you generally don't want, because the create2 address, like the address that it ends up, is dependent on the bytecode, and if there's a difference in the bytecode, then that also, yeah. But yeah, generally this is a ongoing discussion, I would say, but people can opt out. You can always turn it off in the solidity settings, so you can see. Actually, it's a good point. Like I maybe should have a Dune dashboard or something for how many contracts have this explicitly turned off or so on.
So I do want to talk a bit more about the standardization part of especially like smart contracts. So I know you recently introduced Vera, the Verifier Alliance. So can you talk a bit about that? What is like the Verifier Alliance?
Yeah. So the Verifier Alliance is an alliance, as the name suggests, of verifiers, and the main purpose is about what we have all talked so far. So the easy and open access to some smart contract source code in EVM chains. And how we do that is we basically have a shared database where different verifiers push the contracts they have to that database. It's quite simple, but it's a good amount of coordination effort, I would say. So we have currently Sourcify, BlockScout, Tenderly, RouteScan, which is also maybe known as Avascan. They are one of the main explorers inside for the Avalanche ecosystem, and Dora, right now we are like five different verifiers. So basically, as anyone, when anyone's verifying a contract, they share this inside a standardized format inside the database, and then this database is publicly exported in Parquet data format. And what you can do with this is a lot of things, like a lot of data analysis, a lot of, for example, a good use case I like giving an example of is when you find a vulnerability, for example, then you can easily search through this whole database which contracts have this vulnerability, right? Because it's just, then if you have everything on a database, it's so easy to find these patterns. So it's still something in the making. We just distributed the first export of the database, but the database needs some more work. There are some mistakes, there are some issues with how everyone's writing data, because if you can imagine like 5 different people, 5 different entities, like all have their own taste and all have their own way of writing stuff. So we try to standardize as much as possible, but people can already join. It's at verifieralliance.org, or in Twitter it's, I think, Verif Alliance, but yeah, verifieralliance.org. You can already check out the website. There is a Telegram group. You can also follow the developments on there. And for example, we shared the database export for people's use for the first time, but with the disclaimer that, okay, this data is not complete, this can contain some mistakes and so on. But yeah, in general, the goal is to like open up everything, like, and break the silos. And yeah,
This shared database has me thinking about how new things are coming on chain. There's new L2s that are coming up that are cheaper, L3s. Things are getting to the point where we're putting more and more things on chain, and you're talking about a database to hold source code. I wonder is there thoughts about, hey, this could be its own L2, or hey, this could be its own L3 that's just smart contracts and their bytecode and some kind of verification between the two and people signing off on chain or something like that. You get 2 out of 3 signatures from the Verification Alliance on chain that says they did the compilation and it worked. We did the compilation, it worked. Multiple checkoffs, and then you could just go on. You go to this like cheap L2 and ask it, "Hey, I've got this contract, or I've got this bytecode. What does it relate to?" And it can respond
Yeah.
back. Have you guys thought about that at all, or is it more like, nah, this is so big that like you need a database and a database dump that people will use?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. I have given some thought on this, on how to kind of decentralize Sourcify in a similar way, because when you look at it, it's a kind of a time series data. Like it's like everyone verifies their contracts and they share it like in sequences, right? And of course, then there's the signing idea that you came up with. So I would say it's possible, but the database is already quite a lot of effort, and I rather have it solved first in a centralized way and then decentralized progressively. I said it. I also thought about this for like decentralizing Sourcify, because for example, Sourcify is open source, right? And multiple people can also run their own Sourcifys. Like think of it as a Ethereum client. Everyone can their own Sourcifys, and then everyone can kind of share a timestamped blocks of verified contracts, and we can like hash them all together, and then we can compare across different Sourcifys if these are matching, so that like you can say, okay, like if this Sourcify is saying this is correct and the other one is saying also the same hash, then I know like that this data is probably correct.
So even writing the hash of your Sourcify on mainnet every 20 minutes, and someone can just make sure to check with that with their local version syncs up or something like that, could be another way to decentralize it. That's interesting.
If you heard about a project called True Blocks,
Oh yeah,
True Blocks,
TJR, my man.
Jay is working on a similar thing. I think I kind of get the inspiration when I'm reading the details of the project. So they mostly do the same thing, but they index the on-chain data and they publish it decentralized way.
So I have here in my notes, I don't know if this is a rumor or what it is, but did you get started at DevCon? Like where did this start as like a DevCon side event? Like what Sourcify, I think is what I'm thinking of. Where
So
did it get started? Yeah.
I guess what you're referring to is Verifier Alliance. Verifier Alliance started
Okay.
last year
Okay.
at ETHCC. Last year at ETHCC we met in person with different people, with BlockScout, us, and I think the main coordinator was Sam CZ from Paradigm. So
You may
he
know of
kind of
him.
maybe yeah he brought us together and kind of kicked off the project, and I'm glad he did. And then other people joined, shown interest, and it's growing slowly.
So there's still kind of this elephant in my mind about how we have to be careful at the EF with stepping on other toes. And of course, if there's just Etherscan, we need source verification that's open source. But if BlockScout's doing open source verification, how does Sourcify justify itself in that ecosystem to the I guess the high ups in the EF that are saying careful not to create a chilling effect? What's that subtlety?
Yeah, I think multiple things are there. One, Sourcify was more a niche or focus project on Solidity metadata only. Especially before I joined and even when I joined, so the main goal was like fostering the metadata, and we had also other sub goals like human readable transactions and so on. If you go to our website, you will still see that. But over time, we kind of pivoted to this main problem of open sourcing the whole thing and open access to the source code data, because that's the basis of everything. Like without open access to this data, nothing else makes much sense. And as I said, like the metadata and everything about metadata is a bit not fully adopted by everyone. And that's one thing. Like the project started with a different scope, but kind of evolved in this way. The second thing I would say is like we don't exclude other people. Like the data we have can be anywhere. Like there are a lot of people, for example, saying us, "Oh, when I verify on Sourcify, does it appear on Etherscan?" Like right now it doesn't, but actually it should. Like why shouldn't it? I don't know when we can do that, but I really think about whenever someone gives us a contract, like why shouldn't we go and verify that on Etherscan as well? Like
Yeah,
it should
you
be everywhere.
trigger it using the API to Etherscan.
Exactly.
Etherscan's happy because they get more things verified. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like a public good. Like it's like should be really open and available for everyone. It's not like we are not chilling out that much people, because it should be everywhere and it should be easy and it's open everywhere. That's kind of the way. But but if maybe in a couple of years, if Sourcify grows a bit too large and we say maybe okay, we go our own way. I hope so.
I think that's a really good closing to also like talking about Sourcify and Verifier Alliance, and I kind of want to talk a bit more about the event side of things, because I know that you have been like a serial event organizer for the past 2 years. So did you start out with like being part of the organizing team of ETH Berlin, or like what's your involvement been in like Ethereum community
Yeah.
events?
I don't know how I started all of the stuff. Like, why did I begin? Why am I always organizing events? So I think it's kind of part of me, my personality, or like my character, that I've always been involved in like events and these kind of things, especially even in a high school, or in university. I was like organizing sport festivals or Model United Nations organizations, events, so on. So when I joined the space and I see like there are so many events already attending them and speaking them, I was I think I was pulled towards being part of it and contributing to that. And ETH Berlin happened kind of naturally because I work closely to organizers like Francie and the others. So I said, when they were like talking about ETH Berlin, I said, yeah, how can I contribute? Like I can do the website and so on. And at the time they were looking for a website developer, so that was the perfect timing, I would say. And I gladly have done the ETH Berlin 3 website, the Protocol Berg, and ETH Berlin 4.
They look good too. They have that like nerdy vibe.
Yeah,
Those are good websites.
yeah,
The
thanks.
design and everything. You have a designer working with you, or how's that work?
For ETH Berlin 3, we had a designer, no BS Studio, but the others, yeah, we designed ourselves, like just me
Awesome.
and the others. Yeah, yeah, I love them. Sometimes I open and look at them for some time, missing the old
So
days.
so not just the like event websites, but events in general. It sounds like you partake in and organize a lot of. And I remember my first hackathon was probably like ETH Denver 2018 or something like that. And I remember it kind of activated me. It activated me in a way where I thought I was going to show up and be like, I know how to write smart contracts. I'm going to be the belle of the ball. And I show up and everyone knows how to write smart contracts. And in fact, some of these OGs like wrote the language that we write smart contracts in, right? And
Yeah,
so by going to an event, it helped like galvanize me in a way or activate me in a way that like there are folks in this ecosystem that are just super smart and super high agency, right? High agency, high intelligence. And then I look back at myself who is, kind of cocky coming in like I can figure this out. And it really like helps you understand the depth of the ecosystem when you go to an event. Do you have that same feeling or mentality about events?
yeah. I think I still have that. Like even though after attending a bunch of events, you get the exhaustion from the events as well. That's the downside. But I think events are quite special in this ecosystem. I guess in other ecosystems as well, but at least from what I can see here is, for example, like Vera started at ETHCC. Like if we didn't bump into each other at ETHCC, this wouldn't have started. So that also, I think the Vera has been a really good example for me as well, how important it is. And it's also changed my perspective to going to events, like because as I said, I was feeling the more exhaustion, but I start to feel okay, like maybe you can take it slower in the events, but being there and being at the same time in the same place with all these people is really important, and it really sparks really valuable interactions.
So like it's kind of I would say there's a lot of nerds in the space, and nerds tend to be more introverted. And even the discussion that you would have on a call is just not the same as like when you go to an event and you're sitting in the corner and you're bored and you're forced to be there and someone sits down next to you and sparks up a conversation. Some of those conversations are like the most important conversations of all of your business, and you have no idea until you go and do that. So there's definitely like, yeah, something to forcing a bunch of introverts into the same space and not controlling the conversation and letting them run free and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think it's a really good onboarding mechanism. Like we also with EDA, we also organized an event in Turkey during DevConnect called Eat Günü, and that was an event for newcomers in Turkey. It was a couple thousand people. It was a large one, but um, I think the events like these serve a really important purpose to those people to show what's really behind all of these. Like they, because generally people hear about the financial side of things, people getting rich, people getting scammed, people getting poor, but what is happening in the kitchen, like what's happening behind the scenes, I think it's really important to show both the technical and like economical and social aspects of the technology. And I think they serve a really important purpose for the ecosystem.
And it's good to add one like critical note here that there's definitely a population of 20 to 30% of the people that show up at these events that are just traveling around to the events and having fun.
Always.
I went to like a DevRel conference in like 2019, and I'll tell you what, DevRel 2019 was like basically people on vacation. Like, it was like, how do we continue to keep doing these conferences where we can see parts of the world? So that like actually kind of leaned me to this like mental model that all events are about. You have to think of them as like at least 25% fun and vacation. And then there's also this like, also I'm going to be forced into a room with a bunch of introverts, and it's going to open up these conversations that are really good. And also there's going to be folks from there that by us being on the ground is activating them within the space. But you always have to look at that other part and say, yes, some of this is vacation, and some of these jabronis are here just for the vacation. And make sure you're split for reasonings around holding a conference or going to a conference contain a lot of the good things too, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you develop a good sense of what categories those people fall in after a while, so you get a like stereotypes and filters, which doesn't mean like there are also room for those people as well. And also like not all conferences are the same, I would say, because some are like more tech focused, some are like financial focused. Like I personally, I'm not really interested in more financial businessy conferences, but like that also has to happen. So it's nice that we have this variety.
So just on that point too, like I remember in the event in Istanbul during Dev Connect, Eat Günü, which means eat day in Turkish, like I actually invited like some of my closest friends in Turkey to come and listen who had no idea about Ethereum. And then Vitalik gave like a 30-minute keynote on like introduction to Ethereum. And then after that, they were like, oh, wow, like I finally understand it. And I've been talking about it for like 2-3 years. So that was like a good place for them to like come in and like to listen to that, and from like a very influential people, etc. So yeah, I really do enjoy events, but they can get really overwhelming. So like limiting to a certain amount per year.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. And the websites you created were really good. So shout out to that too.
Thanks.
But yeah, I think we covered quite a lot today. Like we talked about like smart contract source code verification, Verifier Alliance, touched upon events and like how the EF operates, what you guys do. It's been really nice to have you. Maybe one last thing is like, where can people find you? And thank you so much again for being with us today.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. So I really also enjoyed it. I didn't even notice like it's like 45 minutes past. So it was great talking to you guys. So you can find Sourcify, of course, at sourcify.dev. As I said, you can check out the playground.sourcify.dev. Verifier Alliance is at verifieralliance.org. There are also a bunch of resources there. Also, like before I forget, I want to give a shout out to my cool team members, Marco and Emmanuel. We are a team of 3. We are a small team, but yeah, we're closely knit. So shout out to them as well. And yeah, Sourcify, you can just follow Sourcify.dev. And yeah, I'm also on Twitter, Kaan Uzdogan. You can follow me or ask me any questions. Happy to talk about everything about source code verification.
Super. Thank you, Kaan. And we'll add the links below. And yeah, I was super surprised when I heard you were 3 people like a few weeks back in ETH Berlin. I was like, wow. And I think it was only 2 for a very long time too. So it's glad to see you guys expanding. But yeah, thank you so much, Kaan, for being with us today.
Yeah, it was great having you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.